So we're going to talk today about some common steering problems and some things to take into consideration when you pick up the reins that are connected to the bit in your horse's mouth. So when you are riding with your reins, you have it attached to a bit, and even if you ride bitless, the concept is very similar. And the bit is going to sit in your horse's mouth over the tongue and over the bars, hopefully nice and straight and level. When we go to pick up and changing the reins to ask the horse to turn or slow down or stop or even collect, the bit is going to change shape. So if we imagine, Lori, can you put your hands out like this? Your horse's mouth, okay? So if we imagine this bit is in your mouth, we want the bit to lay flat over the tongue with a bit side on each side of the mouth. So say I go to pick up to stop the horse, ideally the bit would just lift up into the corners of the mouth and the horse would be able to respond very easily. What can easily happen, and it's got a little lozenge in it, so it's less severe than a straight, a single jointed snaffle. But say I'm careless with my hands, or could you we're just gonna do that. We'll put that like that.
Yay.
Okay. So I go to slow Lori down and I pull very hard. What can easily happen is the bit does this nutcracker thing in her mouth. Instead of laying flat like this, it goes down on the bars of the mouth, and this little piece goes up into the roof of the mouth. And what almost every horse in the whole world is going to do in protest is raise their head or speed up and raise their head. So we get the opposite effect of what we want. And when we think about turning, thanks Lori, I release you. When we think about turning, we can get the same issues where when we want to turn, we can easily have a horse go the other direction. So say I pick up the left rein and the horse tips their head to the outside. Most of us are inclined to pull harder on that rein while the horse is tipping harder to protect themselves. So if we consider what the inside of the horse's mouth looks like and what the bit inside is doing, that makes it a lot easier. So Laura, you can make your mouth again. So when I go to turn my horse left, in the perfect world, I would just pick up this left rein and that would only act on the left side of the bit, and that would make Lori easy to turn. If I'm not careful, we get this effect. So I pick up my left rein, Lori's actually turning her head to the right, and that would start to get her quite upset, and she might turn right even faster while I pull left even harder. And so if I wasn't sure what was happening in her mouth, I could easily think she's not listening, she's being disrespectful, she's being naughty, I need a stronger bit, and all of those things, when really it's just a simple matter of the mechanics are all wrong. So when I go to use the left rein, I want to act on only the left side of the bit, so I get this nice little turn. When I go to stop, I want to pick the bit up in such a way that both sides are even, and same with slowing down. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like on horseback. So I'm going to start out by demonstrating with Lori here, who I've given some fake reins that aren't connected to anything so that we don't pull on D, to demonstrate some common hand mishaps and what their effect is on the bit and the horse. So the first one we're going to demonstrate with Lori is one that I frequently see where a rider goes to slow or stop a horse with reins that are far too long. So Lori's going to have really long reins and she's going to pull. Let's get this up on the chest. Go ahead and pull to get D to stop. All right, D's such a good girl. She's like, so what we have had is Lori has a lot of tension in her arms and hands. First of all, her upper body has leaned forward. Her elbows have come behind her body. She's tipped onto her the front of her pelvis. And what the bit would do, you can relax your hands now. But what the bit would do if it were in Dee's mouth like that and Lori went to pull like this is something like this. So now this lozenge is in the roof of her mouth. These bits of the bit are on the bars of her mouth. She's going to raise her head and probably speed up to avoid that. And that's going to result in Lori feeling like she has to pull harder. And then it's going to end up being somewhat of a tug of war. So rather than doing that, what we'd rather see is Lori getting her reins nice and short and even, one on each side equally. Nice relaxed forearm, elevating the top of her chest, so almost like she's lifting her collarbone, dropping her weight into her body, her lower body, and then bending her elbows almost like they're weighted down. That's going to bring the bit up into contact with the corners of her mouth, and if we lift the reins just slightly the way Lori's positioned, the bit would come from this position slightly up, and D would be very easy to slow and respond. So we're actually going to show you that one in a minute. So that is the way that we would prefer to have it done rather than make the bit do this. Now when it comes to turning, a frequent thing that people do to turn, you can let your reins out. We're going to turn her to the right, and you're going to turn with just your right rein and go ahead and just pull it. All right, so you can see in Lori's body, her elbow has come away from her side. Her hand has turned flat. Her whole body has collapsed, so her rib cage has collapsed. She's kind of going like this, almost leading the turn. The bit would be like this. So we've lowered one side of it than the other. Dee's head is going to follow the shape of that bit, and she's likely going to turn left instead of right, which will result in Lori feeling like she has to pull harder and lean even farther. So every bit of that imbalance in Lori's body is going to create imbalance in Dee's body, and they're going to end up in another tug of war. So instead of turning that way, Lori, show me how you'd rather turn. So that is going to result in the bit shifting direction, keeping it nice and centered in Dee's head, and we can just have her follow the bit very nicely. All right, so let's model that. I'm going to take your reins away, and you can have your real reins back. So the most important piece of the stop is not in the reins, it's in your seat. So it's all about having time to organize your body, lift your chest up. We don't ever want you to hollow your back because we don't want to raise your center of gravity up out of the saddle. We want both your seat bones equally in the saddle with a nice flat back. All you're going to do is just lift your collarbone up while you sink down into the saddle. So your weight is nice and swinging over Dee's back. Oh, good stretch. So we're going to get going, and we're going to practice a halt, okay? So you're going to gather up your reins, get them even, seat still moving, elbows drop to your sides, even contact in both reins while you take a nice breath out. Drop your elbows, close your fingers, relax your hands forward. So how much effort would you say that took to get Dee to stop?
Not very much.
Minimal, right? It's all about preparation. So Lori's going to make a series of left turns. Keep your hands nice and level, because so right there when you pulled your hand to the right, we did this to the bit. So both hands acting evenly. So now we're going to turn to the left, elbows at your side. That's it. Good. Okay. So go nice and straight so the bit is like this. Now pointer toward my sign, both hands level. That's it. Now start your left turn to go over the pole. Very good. How much effort would you say that took?
Very little.
Minimal, right? You know that if you had overdone it with your hands, she would have been harder to turn. It's all about keeping your hands level and turning with both reins evenly so the bit stays level. So you go over these poles. All right, now once you get over these poles, make a left turn to come back to me. And when you get there, you're going to stop, okay? So both hands level, turn your shoulders, your rib cage, your hips. Very nice. Smooth as butter. All right, get your weight centered, shorten your reins, get ready to halt. She felt you get ready, and she was ready to do it. So if we keep the rider in balance to turn, and if you turn with your body and your seat first, that allows you to keep the bit in a better position, which allows the horse to stay a little more balanced as well. But if the rider goes to have to pull sideways or back, that offsets our entire body, makes us in a worse balance, and puts the whole horse off balance. So it's more likely we'll run into resistance or flat out refusal. So learning to handle your bit with your own seat and keeping the bit stable in mind will help you keep the horse softer, more responsive, and much happier to do what you ask.